always the way. Going back a long way, code was not really written like that. People would just write their own. They wouldn't have redistributable libraries. You wouldn't have some common library. You just write libraries for your system, literally. This took a long time to happen in code. That you actually, libc gets used many times, not just by one thing, if you like. But the other thing that Debian is doing, if you like, or apt is doing, is distribution. The APIs isn't actually done by Debian, it's done by the other people, right? What Debian does is bring that stuff together and get it onto your machine. Like, download it and shove it somewhere on your disk in the right place, and give it a name, and make sure it's compatible. Right? And guess which of those are harder? Which do you think is the harder, the first or the second? The second. Okay. I mean, I would definitely say the first is hard. And why is the first hard? Because the first isn't a technological problem most of the time. And I have to say, often there's a tendency, and I have this as well, of this community to think that technology is the solution to lots of problems. But one of the points is that what's really hard about APIs, I think, is that they're a social problem because they're about agreeing on something. They're about things like not breaking other people's stuff by just randomly changing yours when you feel like it. They're about like social commitments, they're about shared understandings. Like how much effort goes into naming stuff. I mean, I don't know other coders out there, but I always find naming things is like one of the hardest things I do, naming things well. And that's partly about social shared conceptual understanding that we have. So they're domain specific. Geodata isn't the same as genomics. People won't agree on stuff in the different areas. It requires coordination, which is hard. They're hard to plan in advance, and you normally get them wrong when you do them the first time. And so things like RDF, people come to me and say, what about RDF? Isn't it solving all of this? Well, what about schemas, guys? And do you notice how most schemas are wrong in version 1? And then even there's always a dispute, and at the moment I do some RDF, and there's always 3 different schemas often for a particular area. Maybe Dublin Cores made it 5 years in. This stuff is really difficult. So I'm going to completely ignore it because it's hard, and I can't solve it. Only particular individuals will solve it by trial and error and agreement. Like, it's building a platform. That's what ultimately it's doing. So we're focusing on the distribution part because that's easier, I think. Right? Because I don't have to get into this question of what schema have you used or what standard have you agreed on. I can just say, well, what we're going to try and do is this crude packaging. If we take stuff and wrap it up with some metadata, and we do it in a form suitable for automated upload and download, and we think about really interesting questions, such as, what do APIs mean? Data's big compared to code, right? It's much bigger than code most of the time. So often you want to install a package which is just represented as an API, not as something on your system. Now, how do we cope with that well? How do we mimic dependencies on APIs? And we register it so it can be found. Those are things we can do now. So this is, if you like, the vision of what we CKAN has now been around, which is part of the thing behind this for about 2 years, and we planned it about 4 years ago. And there's 3 bits then of this system. You can forget the bit on the left. One thing you want is a registry. You need to know where to find stuff, what it is, right? But in data, you want to separate that from all the actual stuff, right? Because the stuff is massive most of the time, or it can be massive. And even, we're not for profit. We don't have hundreds of terabytes. We're not Google, right? So we want to separate that from the storage. So you want storage and you want a registry. And the storage problem, by the way, really seems to be an open problem for this community, which is how do we do effective distributed storage? We've messed around. I think people from Tahoe are here. We've messed around with Tahoe and other things, but you could store on archive.org. But how do you do good distributed storage here for open data stuff, for large-scale storage, which people can contribute to from the community? But we built CKAN. We built a registry. It has an API, and it has a Python client, other things. And it has apt-get. It has a thing which talks to that registry and therefore can also talk to storage. So the idea is you can register things. This is a way of bootstrapping things. You can register things with a pointer to where their payload is. You have a registry separated from the storage because you're not going to be able to upload all this data all the time. So you need to be able to point outside to some other system. And so, if you like, this part of the system is built. And we're piggybacking on other stuff like archive.org. And if people have suggestions for ways we could build distributed storage that we could use or other people could use, I'd really like to hear them. So what does it actually look like? This is what it looks like. There are currently 766 registered packages as of this afternoon. It's kind of wiki-based. One thing to notice is that people dealing with data aren't all coders. So the web user interface really matters here because people need to be able to register data, and we need it to be versioned. So this is like a versioned data model here. So anyone can edit the packages at the moment, though you can have owners and you can shut stuff down. You have recent changes. And it's like fresh meat, CKAN, or gems, or something like that, but for data. It's been running for 2.5 years. And you can register stuff on it. And here's a particular package. In fact, that package I talked about earlier, the USA employment, I actually put this up there today, and I just had to type data package register the name of this thing, and it was there. So here it is. And it has links, has a download URL. We're actually replacing that. One of the things people tend to do with data is they don't tend to put it in a single file. They put it in multiple files. They do all kinds of crazy stuff with it that makes it much harder to deal with, right? Anyone here done packaging? You all end up putting stuff in some nice tar, some nice zip. I mean, also, by the way, that doesn't work so well for 2 gigabytes of stuff. It's a kind of problem. So a lot of open questions here that I think are really interesting also for hackers, like how do we do this? How do you scale well for large data sets? How do you integrate other things such as torrents? So, oh yeah, and another thing I should just mention is this make an inquiry using is it open. Lots of people give out data, even people who mean it to be open and they don't put a license on it. Most people here, I bet you, who make open source stuff, do you put a license.txt in your distribution? Anyone do that? And you probably don't even read it. You maybe copy it from somewhere else, right? Or from your other project that you did. Because it's really boring and unimportant to coding. I mean, it is, but it's also essential. So if you start doing data, shove a license.txt in there, for God's sake. It's really important. Because without it, we're going to start making inquiries to you using is it open. So then the thing is, the last part of that is the apt, the kind of command line tool and if you like, library that you can use. So this works, what I'm showing you here. I'm not just showing that you can install data package right now and fingers crossed this should work, right? I ran it this afternoon. Does anyone know the poem, The Wind Hover? I am talking to a German audience, I'm aware of that. The Wind Hover, by a guy called Gerald Manley Hopkins. It's a beautiful, amazing poem in English, if you like that kind of thing. It's a really amazing guy. He was a very troubled Catholic chap. So anyway, interesting guy. But there's this data package demo which happens to contain this poem. And you can get info about it. You can do this, obviously, with all of the 766 packages on CKAN. And you can install it. And when I say install at the moment, what does install mean for data at the present? I don't know. So what I mean by it is I download and unpack it somewhere. But the biggest thing to do with this, right, is dependencies. The biggest thing we want to do this because that's what makes componentization work. That's what makes divide and conquer work, which means you can do something and I can use it without having to go in and just install it. At the moment, people do what I call the lump of data model. You just download more and more stuff onto your machine, normally from Excel spreadsheets, and munge it into some big thing that you want, and then you never give it back out because there's no way to do that easily. So this is how you give it back out now. When you've done that, all you need to do is create a very brief metadata.txt, and you can just do data package registered to CKAN, and it will be up there. So I'm going to just hand over to my colleague for a moment, Daniel, who's head of the OKF chapter in Germany here. And what we're trying to do to internationalize and kind of decentralization, like eating our own dog food, right, is this. So I'm just going to hand over to you for a moment, Daniel.
Thanks for the talk. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Daniel Dietrich. I'm very happy. Is that on? It's on, but we need to. Okay. So I'm very happy to join this fantastic project and help in the internationalization of CKAN. We actually just launched a German version for CKAN today. As you might see on the right, the translation is still a bit buggy, and there's